If military-trained divers were present within seconds of Honolulu-based commuter airline Makani Kai Air's single-engine Cessna Grand Caravan hitting the water, it could only mean those divers being there was part of an intricate plan made weeks, if not months, in advance. Although the U.S. Navy controls SEAL teams when they're deployed abroad for military purposes, use of such teams for political, propaganda, and deception missions is directed by the intelligence community. Such deception missions are generally not authorized against law-abiding domestic targets, but this one was. In the excerpted online article shown, the crashed Caravan Commuter Airlines CEO and owner apparently led Hawaii News Now to believe the crash site was a mile offshore from the Kalaupapa Peninsula. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, proceeded with an investigation of the crash that would ultimately take 2.5 calendar years and many, many more man-years. But in its report, the NTSB ignored lots of evidence, misconstrued and came to corrupt and false conclusions about other evidence, and even falsified evidence multiple times in ways that would appear to support the event being an accident, when investigators must have known that it was a staged event. In the process, the NTSB falsely laid blame with the engine and its manufacturer, Pratt & Whitney Canada, even though many people involved with the investigation must have known the ditched engine did not have a catastrophic failure, as was claimed. The image in the article, now with an orange box around it, came from the U.S. Coast Guard and was known by that branch of the military not to be an aerial view of the crash site, despite how it was apparently represented to Hawaii News Now. The image was not an aerial view of the crash site, but making that claim was a mostly successful attempt to show that the plane ditched a mile out from shore, falsely establishing that it was outside the jurisdiction of state or county investigative agencies, when it was actually a picture of a U.S. Coast Guard helicopter and not the crashed Cessna Grand Caravan. The pilot and all the plane's passengers would have known that it had crashed only about 1/8 of a mile offshore, at the location pointed to by the author-inserted yellow arrow in the upper left photo. That map shows the average depth in that area to be less than 4¼ meters, in other words, about 14 feet. Nearby there was another area that was less than 1 meter deep. The lower middle image shows the plane was 13.5 Grand Caravan wingspans, that is 234 yards, from shore. The farthest left image in that picture is the actual ditched plane. From his spot in the water near the plane, one of the passengers, a semi-retired college professor, did some visual math in his head, using the height of the nearby lighthouse that he remembered. He calculated that he was 3,400 feet from it. The plot of that calculation can be seen in the image at the upper right. How coincidental it is that that distance comports precisely with where the craft was shown in multiple ways to have ditched. It went down 702 feet from shore, as measured in Google Maps shown at lower right, as well, not a mile out where the depth of the ocean floor might otherwise have precluded its feasibly being recovered. The distinctively colored black and yellow bag in the upper two frames appeared under the caravan's tail within a mere 32 seconds after the ditching. The only feasible way it could have gotten there was from someone that was already positioned in the water as the plane ditched. That's known partly by the sophisticated electronics the bag would soon show it contained. The transformed bag would double as a non-standard, undisclosed life jacket for one of the passengers during most of the scenario. Along with at least 5 other passengers, the former Green Beret at lower left disregarded obeying the pilot's claimed order for everyone to don a life jacket before leaving the plane, as he works with the bag and another Tupperware-like container not previously seen in the cabin with any of the passengers. Such a high percentage of non-compliant passengers begs the question of whether the pilot actually gave the life jacket order, especially because the pilot said he gave the order prior to ditching. The video shows all the passengers right up to ditching, yet not one of them is seen reaching for a life jacket, nor is the pilot heard on the audio giving such a command. Another reasonable question to ask would be, why would such a high percentage of passengers not bother to don their life jackets, even without a direct command from the pilot? The distinctive black and yellow bag is slowly, over about 20 minutes, seen to keep changing shape in the water. It's touched and tended to by several of the passengers before it's literally strapped on by an elderly female passenger who, by her husband's report, was a good swimmer. That female septuagenarian is seen in the upper 3 images. But by the time she puts her legs through the straps, the life jacket has sprouted a 20-inch long, 6-inch girth phallus-shaped antenna, which is actually an expected piece, as it would round out the needed equipment to transmit an underwater digital network's data into the air. That lady is seen throughout most of the exercise keeping the tip of that antenna out of the water, as she otherwise appears not to be wearing a life jacket at all, even though she's sitting in one, as seen in the top middle picture. Training to work with and wear this equipment would have likely taken passengers some preparation time prior to the ditching itself. The elderly lady's husband was also given a special life jacket that was anything but standard equipment on a commuter airline Grand Caravan. The NTSB was able to overlook the evidence those special life jackets might represent, leaving them out of the official report's passenger life jacket picture, seen at lower right on screen. A female passenger told the Maui County Police that one of the male passengers already had a neck brace on while in the aircraft cabin. The clear evidence in several video frames suggests he also wore a helmet. It also appears one of the passengers was given a device to allow her to alternately inflate and deflate her life jacket multiple times while in the water. The former Green Beret was outfitted with what appears to be a personal walkie-talkie, as seen at upper right. These pieces of unusual and high-tech gear could not by chance all have been found at an accidental open ocean aircraft ditching location. A large mechanical device was implausibly seen on site within minutes of the ditching. It's unreasonable to think that any accident victim would have chosen to unfold it on the starboard wing. None of the passengers were seen to work with the device, nor did any of them report anything about such a device being at the scene in any NTSB, rescue, or media report concerning the crash. One might expect the on-site military trained personnel would give first aid to anyone injured in the crash and get everyone as quickly as possible to further help on shore. But the on-scene divers didn't do that, choosing instead to spend their time unfolding and using that mechanical device as seen from under the wing. Moments before this video frame on screen was recorded, all the passengers were seen some 85 yards from the ditched aircraft. A large man-made device has made a most unlikely chance appearance above the engine compartment. The 3 frames on screen were recorded sequentially, left to right, all within 2 seconds of video. Look at the water level compared to the aircraft's end number, and the windows to see that the craft is rising ever higher in the water. Note the bubbling spew from around the engine at the tips of the black arrows. The placid water otherwise seen at the site can't account for such bubbling or splashing. Even though the Kalaupapa shoreline was only a couple of 100 yards away, there's no plausible way for the green slip and slide of a Kalaupapa leper's grandchild to blow against the plane, as can be seen on screen. 45 seconds prior to the 3-frame sequence we just saw, the 2 on-screen images now seen were in the videographer's lens. The top image came first, then about a second later came the lower image. It's been verified by a person familiar with the equipment in use at or near the time of the crash that what is seen against the starboard side of the aircraft is an underwater demolition transport vehicle, a UDTV, that has apparently lost neutral buoyancy and popped above the water. Professionals have judged that there are no other reasonable theories for the evidence plainly seen here. Evidence that completes an unmistakable fingerprint that at the time, elements of our military or military contractors were on site, in the water and at the plane. When the latest high-tech military equipment, such as this transport vehicle and the electronic fish we saw earlier, unexpectedly appear in falsely purported open ocean waters at an accident site where a high-state official is ostensibly about to die, one may be confident that one or more intelligence community assets are involved. Because these activities were clearly a deception mission, these operators were necessarily working under the direction of the intelligence community. With such a large number of people involved in this pre-planned hoax, if such an official actually died, it would have had to have been either a murder or a stunningly embarrassing operational error, neither one of which is at all likely, in part due to other evidence of the hoax we'll see shortly. The videographer is seen at several places apparently listening to just one of his earbuds. The video's audio stream at no point suggests he did a sound check. Sufficient video frames disclose that the earbud cord didn't even extend up to the camera, so he wasn't monitoring the camera's recorded audio. So, was he listening to a local radio station's tunes in mono, or did he have some other kind of waterproofed radio coincidentally strapped to his person? After the ditching, some 2 hours before the pilot would announce on airport grounds that she had died, Ms. Fuddy was seen to linger in the cabin for minutes. She got out of her original seat, moved a row rearward, and across the aisle just to sit back down. We can see her through the window. She's not wearing a life jacket. She's posing her arms as if she's being checked out medically. At upper right, Ms. Fuddy's left hip was clearly seen to be outfitted with a black box that likely contained biometric electronics and/or communications hardware. At lower right, Ms. Fuddy is helped by a diver whose military-style haircut is very different from the deputy director's, who otherwise has been and will shortly be again holding Ms. Fuddy's hand. The diver was not on the passenger manifest. Next to him, several floating packages are seen that are visible nowhere else before or after. Even though the Hawaii Department of Health deputy director was repeatedly visited by a little helper, whose name didn't appear on the manifest, by the blasé reactions of the rest of the plane's complement, they didn't seem to mind. Although the helper appeared to have just walked off the set of Goonies, conjecture is that the helper had onboard electronics for audio, video, and communication that would have helped to keep track of and transmit Ms. Fuddy's health status to remote situation planners and observers. The Hawaii Department of Health Deputy Director would later file a lawsuit against Pratt & Whitney Canada, the manufacturer of the Caravan's engine. The parties reached favorable settlements in both that suit and a similar one brought by Ms. Fuddy's estate, the plaintiff's attorney for both suits said. The logistics involved to make this collection of classified military devices appear at a particular place on Earth, where a high state official will shortly be said to have died, is inherently daunting and was likely set in motion several weeks if not months before the crash. It would seem there was no expense spared to make sure the plan was executed without major flaws. Within just several minutes after the ditching, this photo was taken by the first on-the-scene pilot. The scene was otherwise a beautiful, warm, calm day, an eighth of a mile from shore off the Kalaupapa Peninsula. Anyone with concern for passenger safety could have made sure the group swam together in their life jackets towards shore. Although even beginner swimmer passengers without life jackets would have been able to swim or dog paddle in the relatively shallow area to shore in less than 7 minutes, the average length of time the passengers spent out on the water was 100 minutes. But what's this? It appears to be some sort of craft. Its wake suggests it's traveling coincidentally eastward on a parallel course to the plane's orientation. Using the plane's dimensions as a guide, the portion above water would appear to be about 4 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot, which might appear as a small boat atop the water. At the upper left is a known swimmer delivery vehicle. Finding this should be no surprise, as the on-scene divers had to have gotten there somehow, and SEALs do not jump out of airplanes into the water. Roughly an hour after the ditching, as the U.S. Coast Guard Command C-130 arrived on the scene, it radioed to controllers that it had both the aircraft and a rescue boat in sight. In neither the official story nor any media reports has there been any mention of any boats appearing at the rescue scene. A FOIA request was made asking for records concerning Navy, U.S. Marine Corps, and/or SEAL watercraft in use on that date in that area, while making no mention of the Makanikai incident. The U.S. Pacific Fleet's response in relevant part reads, quote, "We confirmed that there were no Pac Fleet ships in the area of the crash and that no Pac Fleet ships were contacted or involved in the search and rescue operations related to the crash." End quote. Nothing had been mentioned about a crash, nor was the request restricted to being only about ships. Thirdly, the request did not restrict itself to information about search and rescue operations. The Navy used weasel words about only ships and limited their response to Pac Fleet ships being contacted or involved in search and rescue operations related to the crash, just to be able to say they had no Pac Fleet documents responsive to our request. More than 26 months after the crash, after the Navy FOIA request had been honed to be even more exacting, the authors received 2 further letters from the U.S. Navy for the request. In the first, the Navy walked back its earlier weasel speak and came up with 2 Navy ships whose presence near the shores of Kalaupapa that day fit even within the initial request criteria. There were Navy ships in the area that day, the Navy says, namely 2 destroyers, both capable of landing helicopters, such as the Seahawk that assisted with the rescue at Kalaupapa. A couple of weeks later, the Pac Fleet commander of the U.S. Navy submarine force chimed in, disclosing that the USS La Jolla, a Navy nuclear submarine specifically rigged to transport SEAL delivery vehicles of the very type possibly seen in the Kalaupapa waters 200 yards from the Caravan, was assigned to be in that area uniquely on that very day. On the lower right is the $2 billion La Jolla submarine with a detachable SEAL delivery vehicle. So what we thought we saw in the water near Fuddy and her fellow Caravan occupants has been all but confirmed by the U.S. Navy only 26 months later, even though all further information has been kept classified. Getting this quantity of James Bond-style electronics to the secluded, unlikely site where a caravan would be claimed to have a catastrophic engine failure included the aid of a U.S. nuclear submarine and her Navy and contractor personnel, a sealed delivery vehicle, and one or more underwater demolition team vehicles. The submarine was assigned to be in the area beginning mere hours before the caravan would hit the water. How could anyone ordering that submarine and its divers to be nearby have known months in advance that 9 passengers would need rescuing just there and then? All that was known at least weeks in advance, yet no one other than Ms. Fuddy was rescued, given first aid, or brought to safety by the submarine's divers. This would seem to be a rather heartless rescue plan, if that's what it was. By the preponderance of much evidence, it is known that there were on-scene military-trained divers, their delivery vehicles, and high-tech gear. Via FOIA'd FAA records, crash records were falsely confirmed to have been justifiably destroyed. FOIA'd military records were doctored, some fraught with error, some went missing, some delayed, some denied, and some were redacted on the basis of exemptions that amount to eyebrow-raising claims of national security. The white rectangle is an extract of the Honolulu Center Air Traffic Control National Traffic Manager's log. Its Special Ops section is most often used for military operations. 9 hours before the caravan would have a catastrophic engine failure, someone placed an airspace reservation of 3,000 feet of vertical space starting at 24,000 feet that brackets in time the single exact hour in which our commuter Grand Caravan was scheduled for takeoff, 3:15 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Upon FOIA request, the FAA saw fit to redact part of that information for an aircraft over the area that was almost certainly in audio-video communication with the passengers and divers in the area. The upper horizontal scene shows the Hawaii Department of Health Director Fuddy and her deputy near one another about 200 yards out from shore. The deputy director is by all appearances standing on the ocean floor. After a splicing due to removed video is seen, the deputy director is in the lower frame next to someone else, a military-trained diver who has assumed the director's place. Note the many differences to be seen between the top and bottom images, recorded ostensibly a mere 37 seconds apart. Life jackets naturally rest differently atop a man's chest versus a female's chest, as seen on screen. The diver's frame is taller and thinner, showing no distended belly. Ms. Fuddy's shoes are clearly different from those of the diver. The 4 points of comparison between Ms. Fuddy's shoes and those of the replacement diver at right make plain that the real Ms. Fuddy was replaced by a tall, thin person wearing entirely different footwear. The 4 aspects of Ms. Fuddy's shoes, toe, sole, side, and top, are each different from those 4 aspects of the diver's shoes. There's lots of evidence of an underwater communications network, replete with repeater nodes disguised as electronic fish, an air-water antenna that a passenger wore, housed in a life jacket, extra personages on site, an electronic unit attached to Ms. Fuddy, microphones and listening radios, heavy demolition support equipment, 1 or more underwater demolition transport vehicles, a sealed delivery vehicle, and a $2 billion nuclear submarine. That's quite a well-coordinated military-style exercise. Just who was this Fuddy that the deep state would pull out all the stops for her? With all the James Bond equipment verified to be on site within seconds of the ditching, with the FAA destroying crash records against its own policies, with the NTSB generating a completely false investigative report, and with so many agencies coordinating corrupt results, citizens may be confident that this was a hoax that used our own military to attempt an assured electoral continuation of the deep state's favored administration to control the executive branch. In short, the planners used the military for a weaponized, politically beneficial hoax to propagandize the American electorate.